I want to welcome you to this event. My name is Jillian Henry. I'm the Vice President of Engagement here at the Purdue for Life Foundation. And this is one of our monthly cocktails and conversations that we are hosting for Purdue Women's Network. And so we're just so glad that you are able to join us here tonight. Just as a reminder, you might want to go ahead and make sure that you are muted. And if you have any questions or any kind of technical questions, you can go ahead and put those into the chat. We know that this event is going to fill you with lots of wonderful questions. And so if you have questions for our presenter or for me as staff or my colleague Maria Whipple as staff, we can go ahead and answer those in the chat as well. So that's how we'll be monitoring the program for tonight. So that being said, before I go ahead and introduce our presenter, I want to introduce my colleague. So up here, you'll see Purdue for Life Foundation. This is my colleague, Maria Whipple. You will start seeing Maria a lot more. Maria has recently been promoted to our Director of Affinity Networks, and that helps include the Purdue Women's Network. So you'll see her along with our Senior Director of Volunteerism, Courtney Magnuson, who you're used to seeing on some of the cocktails and conversations. So we just have another staff face for you to get to know as we start doing our networking together. And now I want to turn it over to our presenter for today. We are so lucky to have Kate Young with us. And this is probably not the first time you've seen Kate, because if you are following our podcast, you know that this is a face that we are loving to see here at Purdue. Kate Young is the host of the This is Purdue podcast. It's Purdue University's official podcast. She has served as an executive producer for more than 20 podcasts, hosts her own show with more than 10,000 listeners, and most importantly, is a proud Boilermaker. After graduating from Purdue in 2012, she kicked off her broadcast journalism career as a digital producer and reporter at Wayne TV in Fort Wayne, and later at Wish TV in Indianapolis. She has experience in public relations, social media, and sports marketing, and worked for an agency that supported IndyCar, Porsche Club of America, and IMSA racing series. Kate then transitioned to B2B podcast startup company and has more than 3 years of professional podcast experience under her belt. In 2020, she started her own podcast as a fun quarantine hobby, serving as host, executive producer, writer, and editor. She lives in Fountain Square in downtown Indy with her husband, David, and their rescue lab, Macaroni. Kate, we are so excited to have you here with us tonight. Go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Jillian. I'm so excited to be with you all, and thanks for spending your Tuesday evening with me. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on my presentation. Can everyone see this okay? Good, okay.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so like Jillian said, I am a proud Boilermaker. I graduated from Purdue in 2012. I'm the host, writer, and producer of This is Purdue, the official university podcast. It's also important to point out this is the only storytelling podcast in the Big Ten. So other universities have, athletics podcasts, maybe quick 5-minute news podcasts, but this is truly a storytelling vessel for Purdue, and that's what makes it so unique, I think, in my opinion. So has anyone listened to an episode? And if you have, I'd love to hear what your favorite episode is and why. And I don't know if I'm able to see the chat to even answer these.
I can tell you, or so far, I said I've seen David's.
Okay. David Bojaya, he was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Sheila says the one where you drove around giving COVID scholarships.
Yes, I will talk about that. There's a lot of behind the scenes stories with that one. So I'm excited to share more about that. Okay, Jeff Brom, graduation. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad that some of you are in tune with the podcast and listening. As I'm going to present today, we're going to see how far we've come with video, incorporating video into all of our awesome audio. So I am excited to share more. And I'll just start with a quick agenda. I'm going to share a little bit about me. I'm going to talk a little bit about why Purdue has gone all in on podcasting and how we're using it as a marketing tool, the pieces and parts that goes into making each episode, the variety of incredible guests, as you guys have shared in the chat. There's something for everyone. So I'll highlight a couple of those guests. We're also going to share a couple of video highlights and how video fits into our podcast strategy. A couple behind the scenes stories. We've had multiple VIP guests. Also the scholarship episode was really special as well. So then I'll get into how and where you can listen to the podcast, upcoming episodes, and we'll end with a Q&A. So don't be shy. I'd love to hear your questions. So my background, Jillian, of course, shared a little bit, but I graduated from Purdue in 2012. I was in the Brian Lamb School of Communication. I was part of Fast Track, as you'll see in that center photo. And that gave me the opportunity to work a little bit with the Big Ten Network. That picture to the left is me serving as a sideline reporter for the Purdue women's basketball team. And that was a super cool experience, one that I will not forget. And I'll be the first to say I've had quite an interesting career path. I'm not afraid to dive into new opportunities, which eventually is how I ended up back here at Purdue. So I worked in broadcast journalism at 2 TV stations in Fort Wayne and then Indianapolis. From there, I got into public relations. I've worked with some IndyCar clients, some racing clients, and I later switched over to startup life, which was very interesting and very different from more of the corporate setting that I was used to. So I am very happy to have that experience under my belt, to have served and done a lot of work in startup life. And I will say, coming back to Purdue now, it's very rewarding to be back, in an institution. So I will say too that although I have that experience in podcasting, a lot of what I did at Purdue, with Fast Track, a lot of what I did in the news stations really helped me jump back in and prepared me to, interview people and get back on the horse and kind of go back to that TV and broadcast experience. So that's something I'm really thankful for. And that bottom right-hand corner, I was a member of Delta Zeta at Purdue. So I have wonderful memories of all of the philanthropy events we've done, recruitment, and I still have lifelong friends through that sorority. So very thankful for everything that Purdue brought me. So now, why podcasting? Why is Purdue investing in this medium as a marketing tool? And some of you may be avid podcast listeners. Some of you may not know as much about it. So I just want to really quickly explain what a podcast is. It's different from YouTube. It's different from radio. Podcasts are streamable and you can download them. So they're really easy for on-the-go listening. You can listen on a plane when you don't have Wi-Fi, and obviously anywhere else that you don't have Wi-Fi. If you're in the car and you've downloaded a couple episodes and you hit a spot where, you might have horrible service, your podcasts are still going to keep rolling. So another important thing to note, just as I said, if you're driving in the car or on a plane, you don't have to be looking at your phone. Podcasts are the only medium where you're not staring at something. So you might be staring at Twitter or a LinkedIn post or reading an article, but with podcasting, you can kind of go about your daily chores. You can walk your dog and listen. You can go for a walk, fold laundry. I actually got into podcasting when I was training for a half marathon in Indianapolis. So I found that I almost started to look forward to putting in all those miles just because I had something to entertain me. So if anyone is looking for a stress reliever, maybe on your lunch break, go out for a walk and listen to a podcast. It's a really good way to break up your day. And of course, when it comes to marketing and social media, things are always changing in the way that we're delivering messages, advertising, a brand has evolved. So if everyone remembers, and there are still, of course, blogs out there, but so many people invested in this blog strategy where they would post content on their website and then they would share those blogs all over social media, maybe put them in their newsletters. And that was their way to increase traffic to the website. Well, the same thing is true for a podcast. It's an awesome way to tell stories. You can feature really noteworthy people from your company. like we do with Purdue, and you can increase that brand awareness overall. So I just came back from a very big podcast conference in Nashville, and the blog to podcast ratio is 2,300 blogs to one podcast. So a lot of people are like, oh, there's so many podcasts out there now, mine would just get lost in the shuffle. And that's just really not true. So if you have any interest in starting a podcast, or maybe you want one for your company, a business podcast, it is not too late. The time is now. So, and even though there are a million podcasts out there, which is a lot, only 322,000 are actually active. So unfortunately, because of all the work that goes into each episode, whether it's weekly, biweekly, monthly, it's really hard to produce and keep up with that consistency. So a lot of podcasts out there are one and done. They publish an episode and then they're like, this was too much work. So I think Purdue's really at the forefront of getting our name in the podcasting space. And I'm really excited to just help the show grow even more. And so, like I said, the consistency is key. So just like a weekly or a daily newsletter or blog post, you're trying to get into people's routines. So we're on a biweekly cadence. Every other Thursday we come out, and we want our listeners to really crave the content and want those stories and look forward to those coming out. It's also really interesting how the podcast has evolved even since I first came on board earlier this year. We obviously really want good audio, but we also really want video presence. So we started to film in-person interviews and just really grabbing those moments from the interview that are short and they're digestible and they're easy to share on social media. And then we also post them on YouTube. So that's another way that we've grown the show even further, as we're kind of sticking out to people more and more through that video landscape. And as far as promotion for the podcast, if you follow any of the Life at Purdue channels, you've probably seen a lot of our posts, a lot of our videos. Our graphic designers create amazing graphics, and then having campus partners, having Purdue for Life, share those as well. And we also promote through all different types of newsletters throughout the university. So Purdue Today, the Purdue Communicators Council, the monthly legislative newsletter. Those are all ways that we're trying to increase that brand awareness. So another reason why podcasting can be so successful is the search engine optimization. So when people Google Purdue or higher ed podcast or Mitch Daniels, my interview with Mitch Daniels will hopefully pop up for them. So just getting, again, that awareness on the podcast and getting more and more listens and eyes and ears on Purdue University as a whole. As far as metrics, a lot of people who at least know of podcasting will call them listens, and essentially downloads are the same thing as listens. So, I want 1,000 people to listen to an episode, or you might want 10,000 people to listen to an episode. And so when they subscribe to a show, it's automatically downloaded on their phone. So another thing we look at is different spikes. So let's say we had a big spike on a Wednesday, and then I go back and look, and maybe Coach Brom retweeted it, or maybe Boiler Football retweeted it. And so that exposed it to all of their audience. So that upticks the downloads as well. And then, of course, now that we're on YouTube, we love to look at how many views our videos are getting. And I'll share some of our more successful video clips later in this presentation. Okay, so what goes into podcasting? There's a lot of pieces and parts. There's a lot of moving pieces and parts that I rely on a wonderful team with my marketing and communications team. And of course, first we have to nail down the guest and the topic. And when you work for an incredible university like Purdue, this is really easy. This is probably the easiest part. It's just hearing all these stories, kind of fleshing them out more, and then booking that interview. So it could be students, it could be alumni, professors. There's never any shortage of stories at Purdue. So once I nail down the topic, I start the prep work involved. So I'll read articles, I'll listen to any guests who have maybe been on podcasts before to kind of get their style and their vibe while they're being interviewed. And then, of course, I share the questions with the guests so that they feel prepared and comfortable. and then we conduct the interview. So when I first started, I was doing a lot of these virtual Zoom interviews. And then as the COVID-19 vaccine became widely available and campus was kind of opening up more and there was more opportunity for that in-person connection, we started doing that, and it's really made a huge difference. Just in the way you connect with the guest, you can sit right across from him or her, and it's really like having a conversation. After the interview is complete, there's a lot of writing. So there's a script. I record the script, then we piece it all together with any music or sound effects. For anyone who saw the latest episode, it was on the big bass drum. So there was a lot of drum line sound effects, a lot of banging of the big bass drum. So we got to have a lot of fun with that episode. But whereas an episode such as Coach Brom or President Daniels, that's going to be more traditional, just the guest and I talking. So certain episodes have more elements than others. After that, like I said, there's writing, there's the description that you'll see if you open up the podcast in a podcast platform or on our Purdue website, and then writing social media captions, of course. And then once the episode is live and published, the marketing really begins. So we have a whole strategy behind how we're marketing each episode, who we're tagging, who we want to share it. Part of my job too is, sharing it with the guests and sharing it with campus partners who are involved in that department or with that professor or with that guest. So just ensuring that they have all the right tools that they want and need to share it as well. So the other thing that we tried to do, thank you, Judy. We'll see a video from the Big Bass Drum podcast later. So the other thing that we try to do is repurpose that content. So a lot of our episodes are evergreen. You can go back and listen to them, whenever you want, and it's not going to be dated. So a great example of this was our episode on a Purdue professor who created the whitest paint on the planet. And that was in an effort to curb global warming. So he was recently featured just last week in the Guinness Book of World Records. And we took that opportunity to, announce that he was in the Guinness Book of World Records, but also to re-promote the podcast episode. So on social media, we were, re-sharing those links to the podcast, just adding little things like, oh, and by the way, you can check out his full story on This is Purdue. So there's a lot of elements that come back to us later that we want to reshare the podcast. Okay, and I won't read all of these, but these are some of our amazing guests and episodes. And I think it's really important to emphasize, there are so many different stories, and they all have so much variety. It's like an awesome alumni, like what are they up to, or what innovation is coming out of Purdue. So I think that's one of my favorite things about my role here at Purdue is every day is different, every day is unique. One day I'm researching Mars and talking to a Mars scientist about the 2020 rover mission. And, the next day I'm talking to an Olympic gold medalist. So I'm learning a lot personally. And that photo right there is of Professor Shulan Ruan. And he is the person who helped create this white paint. It took 7 or 8 years. And he used, he's a Purdue professor. He's used Purdue labs to create this. And after that episode, I know way more about paint than I could have ever imagined. So there's just a lot of little tidbits and things that I learn along the way. And of course, all the connections that you make and the people you meet is just incredible. So, and of course, there are episodes that are geared more towards our alumni audience, but then there are others that feature students. A really fun one we did recently was all of the traditions and the students experiencing Boiler Gold Rush for the very first time in August. So I think it's important to offer our listeners that variety. And I know another thing I like to think about is, would people that didn't go to Purdue be interested? And to me, that's a huge win. If someone that didn't go to Purdue, my husband went to IU, we don't talk about it, but if he listens to an episode and he's like, okay, that was interesting, then I know that that was a good episode. Or a friend who went to Butler, or just people who are outside of this Boilermaker community, if they find the episodes interesting, then I think that's a huge win. So we're going to transition to a couple of videos right now. Yes, that other Indiana university. Okay, this is a video with David Bodaya, the Olympic gold medalist.
You were part of this HBO documentary called The Weight of Gold, which details mental health and struggles that these really top-tier Olympic athletes, a lot of them, go through. What was it like sharing those really intimate details of your life with the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was approached about this documentary with Michael Phelps, one of the things that I wanted to do was to be able to share struggles that high athletes, elite athletes have. And one of the goals that I had when I wrote my book, Greater Than Gold, in 2016 was to just share that your struggles are the same as mine, and this is how I got through it. And hopefully that's an encouragement to somebody else. But I think it shines an important light on, depression doesn't discriminate, and it's okay to ask for help. And one of the ways that, I've seen success in that is having people around me, a tight-knit circle who, one, is going to hold me accountable, but two, is also going to listen to my struggles and my fears in order so that I might go on the right path.
And that right there, so that was actually done before David, it was done under the assumption that David was going to the Olympics in Tokyo. So that was an interview that didn't exactly go as planned. And I had to cut off some things and repurpose because, as most of you probably know, he did not end up going to Tokyo. And that's another example as well of, taking that virtual remote interview and getting that video content out of it. So even though we don't have this amazing setup with all these lights and cameras and fancy microphones, it's just another way that we could repurpose some video content. So next up we have President Daniels, or nope, big bass drum. That's okay. What goes into running this drum around? Because people see the drum and they're like, oh, cool, it's a really big drum that you just bang on. Like, no, that's not what it is.
Yeah, there's a lot more that we do. I mean, we consider ourselves showmen. So we try to put on a good show. And I mean, the drum weighs 565 pounds. So it's a lot of mass that we're throwing around, but you can do a lot of cool tricks with it. One of the cool tricks we do are called aerials. So we'll have people on the front bar, they'll go and jump up and do a flip over on the front while people in the back are kicking them up. There are times where we run over other people of the drum line with the drum where it looks like we actually just hit them with the wheel, but they're perfectly fine. Pull-ups off the side of the drum. There's a whole laundry list of tricks that we do.
Be sure to check out This is Purdue, the official university podcast featuring the big bass drum. Boiler up! So, as most of you probably heard over the weekend, the big bass drum was in the news a lot. Notre Dame would not let us take the drum into their stadium last Saturday. So it was really unfortunate timing, and or it was really unfortunate for the drum and the All-American Marching Band, but it was fantastic for our podcast. So that got a ton of views. We had Indy Star reporters, we had ESPN reporters, Sports Illustrated, sharing Purdue's tweet with that video. The podcast just kind of exploded, the views on YouTube. And that was, again, I'm really glad that the drum went to Notre Dame after all, but for the podcast, it couldn't have been better timing. So that is an example of a fun in-person interview that we did actually while we were at band camp. And next up, we have our last video, which features President Daniels.
I just thought that especially what our students did, the way they conducted themselves, the character that they showed, was the indispensable element. Yes, we did 100 other things so that everyone's education could keep moving unimpeded. I thought it would be a default of responsibility to just throw up our hands and say, this might not work, so all 35,000 of you, figure it out, take a year off.
What else are you looking forward to, come fall 2021?
How about a national basketball championship?
I'd love to hear that.
We're gonna be good.
So let's get into some fun things.
Well, this has been fun. You mean we're gonna have more fun than that?
So that is an example. That was our first in-person interview, and we had this amazing setup. Our video crew spent hours setting up in President Daniels' office. And we really wanted to hype up the episode. So that's the first time that I thought about the idea of creating a trailer, almost like a movie trailer, a sneak peek of what people can expect and get them really hyped up for this episode so that while they're scrolling on social media or they happen to be on our YouTube channel, they check that out and they're like, oh, I have to remember to listen to that. So that was something fun that we created. And now kind of more for our VIP guests, we do those trailers. So you'll see one coming out for Coach Matt Painter. We had one for Coach Jeff Brom. So those have been really instrumental in getting people hyped up and excited for the podcast. So, all right, I'm going to go right back to my screen here. Okay, what you've all been waiting for, behind the scenes. There's 100 stories I could tell. I have a really awesome team that helps me gather all this content, that keeps me calm when things are hectic or we're racing to get an interview done. And we've had so many laughs. I think I was most nervous before the President Daniels interview. I grew up with him serving as our Indiana governor. And like I said, it was my first in-person interview. But it to this day remains one of my favorites. So I highly recommend, if you haven't checked out the podcast, maybe make that your first one. He was just so honest. It was just fascinating. Even again, if you aren't a Purdue person, it was really fascinating that he was one of the first people in this country to say, kids are going back to college. We're opening this university and we're going back to school when everything was so uncertain. So, and his love for Purdue just shined. So that was definitely one of my favorites. And you'll see that photo to the left, that's us behind the scenes in his office. In the past few months too, another thing that Purdue has given me the awesome opportunity to do is kind of become the voice of Purdue and use the podcast as, not only a marketing tool, but something that, highlights and shines through the university. So I've narrated a few videos. That's me and my friend Ted there trying to get the lighting right with the background. I got to moderate at a panel at Boiler Gold Rush in the far left-hand corner. That was super fun at Elliott. So I was definitely nervous to be on stage at Elliott in front of all those 18-year-olds. But I think one of my favorites is, and someone mentioned it earlier, was giving away that tuition money. So we had a huge project, a huge initiative called the Old Golden Ticket Vaccine Drawing. And essentially, in order to encourage students to get their vaccine, we handed out 10 prizes that were worth $9,992, which is the in-state tuition for Purdue. And this episode, again, if you don't know much about Purdue, I still think it's very fun. It's a documentary style. It follows like our road trip to find all these winners, because guess what? I got a list of 10 people and they said, find these people. So there were international students. There were students that weren't responding that I had to pull a couple of maneuvers to, pull their parents in, or just anything we could to get them to even answer the phone or answer a Zoom call. So we posed it as if they were getting interviewed for the podcast. And that picture right there, that's Quentin Betts. He was our first winner. We had the local indie media come. We had West Lafayette and Lafayette media. It was this beautiful summer day on campus. We had the Boilermaker special, and he was just shocked. And it was just a blast. So highly recommend that you guys go back and listen to that episode. We also traveled to Illinois with the Boilermaker special with the train right alongside us on the highway. And one of our students who won, his dad cooked us a homemade lunch. It was the most precious thing. And then we got to FaceTime the student's 90-year-old grandfather in India. So it was just an absolute celebration. And all the students, even if they were virtual, because obviously we couldn't get to everyone. One of them was in London. So even though they were virtual, they were so excited. They were just super happy, and it was a really special episode. Of course, having the opportunity to meet Coach Jeff Brom, Coach Matt Painter, as you see some photos there, that was really exciting for me, of course, as a Boilermaker, but I was also quite nervous for these. I'm not exactly a sports expert. So I was not fully comfortable, asking these really heavy sports athletics questions. And then I kind of got some guidance of, ask them what's important to them, ask them to open up maybe about family, or ask things that a sports reporter wouldn't ask them. So as soon as we started talking about the Boilermaker community, what West Lafayette means to them, what Purdue means to them, it was an awesome conversation, and it was completely comfortable. And they were both, again, their love for Purdue is so apparent. So, and of course, not every day is glamorous. This is me recording audio in my coat closet. It's very imperative to record in a place that doesn't have windows to help with echo. And then all that padding of those coats and scarves and hats and everything, it kind of serves as almost a studio for really good audio. So that's where I do my recording. And then a little trick that I've used at the end of every interview is just asking the guest, is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners? And this is a really simple question, and they might have thought already, okay, I said everything I needed to say, but that little question every time usually is the best soundbite of the whole episode. A guest remembers something, or something triggers him or her of, oh, I forgot, I really want to say this to the Purdue community. And it's always an incredible moment. So upcoming episodes, we have former Purdue NFL quarterback Jim Everett. He was recently inducted into the Indiana Football Hall of Fame. That's coming out next Thursday, September 30th. Purdue basketball coach Matt Painter. I did that interview last Thursday, and it was amazing to have it on, in Mackey, right on the court, as you see. And, like I said, I've been a Purdue fan for years. I went to Purdue, so meeting kind of this Purdue icon was really exciting. And then we're going to do a Purdue Superfans episode with a couple surprises that are coming at homecoming. So be on the lookout for that at the end of October. And then additional podcasts in the works. Dr. Phil Lau, he has had all of these amazing breakthroughs in cancer research. And then we're going to highlight Purdue's ROTC program and the Veteran Success Center. So really quickly, this is how you can find us. That little purple app on your phone, if you have an Apple, that's called Apple Podcast, and that's our most popular listening platform. So if you just type in "This is Purdue" at the top, you'll see our show come up right away. And then if you click in that middle picture on that little check mark at the top right-hand corner, that's how you know that you're subscribed or you're following our show. So that is how you'll get those episodes automatically downloaded to your phone, and your phone will send you a little ping on every other Thursday saying a new episode is out. So if you forget, which I don't blame you, that your phone will help you remember that you have a podcast in there queued up and ready to go. Ratings and reviews. This is really important for people to find us on Apple. So if Purdue fans are looking for something, or want to listen to a certain, Matt Painter, for example, our podcast will populate at the top if you search for Purdue or for Coach Painter. So that's why it's really important for us to get these ratings and reviews. So if you liked our episodes, some of you were commenting in the chat, If you could take 30 seconds to write that in a comment, in a review, that would be amazing. And then rate us 5 stars. That helps people find us. So, and then of course, if you don't have an iPhone, we are on Spotify. Spotify is a free app, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, anywhere that you can find podcasts. And then finally, if you have an Alexa, you can actually say, Alexa, play This is Purdue, and you can listen through Amazon Music. So I just tested it out today. And so try that out, it works. You can also find us, of course, online if you want to just use your computer, purdue.edu/podcast. And then we are also on YouTube at youtube.com/Purdue University. And YouTube there's a couple things on there. There's those short little clips that we shared earlier, but there's also these full-blown side-by-side interviews that you'd see on, a CNN or an NBC News or something like that. So I have one with President Daniels. I have one with Coach Brahm. So if you'd rather kind of watch the interview, that's a possibility too. So the last piece I want to share is it's just really simple. And I heard this at that podcast conference last month. It's just be recommendable. So just like you would recommend a certain shampoo or maybe, a brand of clothing, leggings, whatever, word of mouth marketing is so valuable. And if each of you tonight shared with just one person, that Purdue has this podcast and to check out a certain episode, it could truly make a huge difference in the reach of our audience and just allow us to continue sharing these awesome Boilermaker stories. And it would just mean a lot to the whole marketing communications department if you can recommend this podcast to a friend or family member. So here's my email too. If you ever have any questions, if you ever have any episode ideas, I'm always open to ideas. And it was such an honor sharing. And I hope you guys enjoyed it too. And I'd love to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. We do have a few questions that have come into the chat, and the first one is from Joanne. So how are the topics decided, and is there a strategy to provide topics for Purdue lovers of all ages?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the topics are kind of decided on a team level. So it's not just me picking out what's interesting. Although when I say that episodes are evergreen and that you can go back and listen whenever, there's usually some type of news surrounding an episode. So, ending the school year with President Daniels, for example, how did he lead Purdue through a pandemic? The right timing to do that was in May after the school year. Or the professor who created the whitest paint. There was all this buzz, all this international media surrounding him. So that was kind of a no-brainer, like, let's do that one. And then, of course, all of our athletic episodes, huge Purdue athletics fan base. So we always know that those will perform well too.
Okay. Will you be covering the Parker Hall's dedication that's coming up October 3rd?
I will not be, but I know we have a huge team going. And there's been several articles that our team has been working on and social posts. But that would be a great episode to feature, after the fact. Sometimes I do that as well. If there's an event happening, then I can share and explain the whole event, a month later or so. But that's a great idea. There's an episode idea right there.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not surprised I see this question from Cindy. Are you going to do a podcast featuring the remodeling of the Union and the hotel? We used to do our Tuesday tours with our staff member, John Sauter, a longtime Purdue employee. And we've been getting that question a lot. Where's John? And is he going to do this? And I got to tell you, Kate, I think you're going to get the new questions here, the new face of those tours. So I wasn't surprised to see that they're really interested in this. So what's in the works for the Union?
Yes, that is actually on my list. I think it's wrapping up in December, because I want to say that it's planned for early 2022. So definitely interested in that, and be on the lookout for that episode. It's in the works.
Okay, I'm so excited to hear that. Okay, I'm just scrolling down through here. How do you send suggested topics to your crew?
There's a couple of things. I work really quite closely with our news department. So, they're the ones kind of pitching these stories. For example, to bring it up again, the white paint, the Bryony Horgan, her Mars mission and that landing on Mars this year. So they're kind of feeding me, hey, this is getting national attention, international attention. I think it'd be really interesting for you to interview and cover that as well. And something that I really took as a compliment was the news team always says, we've written all these articles and we've seen all these stories, but the podcast is always, it's a bit like more intimate, right? You're listening to this person and that person's in your ear and you're hearing the story unfold instead of just, reading a press release about it. So a lot of these things that you see all this buzz about, is usually something that we'd want to cover. And then of course, hitting all of our leaders within the university as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I will take a look for some other chat questions that are coming in. But Kate, I just want to thank you so much for doing this for us. This is really interesting, and just hearing everything that goes into the creation of this. I think you have such a unique and interesting perspective, not only being the host, but also being a producer, also, being so involved from the ground up. I mean, it's much more involved than I think any of us would have expected. So you do us proud as a Boilermaker, Kate. We're excited to see what else you have in store for us.
Thank you so much. That's so nice. And I'm so happy that you guys joined me and spent your Tuesday with me.